Live from the sun-drenched cobblestones of the Eternal City, conversations crossing faith, culture, and current events. Civil discourse, civil debate, and the free exchange of ideas. This is Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. And now your hosts, Bree and Joey.
Good morning from Rome. It's been a while since we last spoke with you. My name's Joey Meugniot, and I'm joined here today with Bree Dail. We're going to kind of kick off this week by going over some updates and some things that have happened over the last couple of weeks. We've missed some big news stories since we've been gone. We had the holiday last week. We're going to talk about that. But that's really kind of, we're going to play catch-up mode this week, Bree. So without any further ado, I'm Joey Meugniot. I'm a political consultant, and we have got a lot of news lined up. So I'm not going to spend any more time with some pleasantries. It's a warm day in Rome, but I know we've got a lot of things to go over this today for the last couple of weeks. So Bree, I know you've got some stuff you want to talk about, and give us a quick update on what you've been up to lately.
Good morning to everyone here from Rome. This is Intersections, Crossing Faith, Culture, and Current Events. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I am an internationally accredited journalist, including accreditation to the Holy See as the Rome correspondent for the Epoch Times. And you can also find me on National Catholic Register, the Catholic Herald, and other outlets. And Joey was mentioning earlier that our show is broken down into multiple parts, including news impacting faith, news impacting culture, and current events. And in the church, in the last 2 weeks, we've had a lot of news. And some of that news has been really impactful. And that is one being the canon law has changed significantly. There's been an update that has been worked on for what we see now over maybe 2 or 3 pontificates. And then Cardinal Marx of Germany, the Archbishop of Munich, has resigned. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And this morning we heard that the CCP has blocked ordination of a deacon on, I believe it was June 5th, due to his private attendance at World Youth Day Krakow in 2016. Haven't heard anything back from the Vatican, but first we're going to talk about the canon law update. Joey, I do have a bottom line up front that I posted the day that this came out. And for those people who don't know, canon law is the law of the Catholic Church. It isn't a civil law, but it does come with punitive actions within the church itself. And the bishop has responsibilities under canon law. He has canon lawyers working underneath him. And then, of course, you have it go up the chain of command all the way up to the Pope. And this is a very important change. This change happened in chapter 6, and its focus is on the punitive actions, the responsibilities, the consequences to actions if you break canon law. So, bottom line up front, the changes to the Code of Canon Law addressing the penalties for sex abusers in particular began under Pope Benedict XVI, and new changes are specific and include the following chapter: identifying violations against the Sixth Commandment, sexual, and also including grooming. So sexual violations. And this also includes, again, grooming. And what I found really interesting, Joey, and I know that you went through this as well, is that part of this idea of grooming is also the use of pornography and engaging others in pornography. And if that is found, that there are consequences to that for a cleric, and also identifying who a victim would be considered. You have children, young children, obviously minors, and then you have individuals who maybe psychologically or emotionally cannot determine whether or not an action is wrong. Those particular vulnerable adults. And then anyone, and this is really important, anyone identified as equal under the law, i.e. anybody who can consider a cleric, a priest, a bishop, even a religious sister as an authority, is considered a potential victim if that authority is misused. Joey?
So I was double muted, sorry. There's it's good to see a lot of these changes. So my first takeaway from this was really that the changes needed to happen. They're positive and they move in the right direction. They put things kind of back in the way that they should be. So that's a positive thing. So I know that people often look for excuses or reasons why this pontificate isn't doing the right thing. However, this is another good example of moving in the right direction. So with that being said, my feelings on it are that it doesn't go far enough. And I think that there's still a lot of work to be done and some more changes that need to happen under canon law to really drive home this point. So, and I think that's really what it boils down to: step in the right direction. It's good changes. These are good things. It's sad that we've gotten to this point in the first place, but they're good changes. There needs to be more. I want to say more stricter, but there needs to be more strict changes and more more strict punishments when it comes to this. I think there's a lot of gaps there. I know we were talking about this last week when we met up for dinner, and we were talking about how there's a lot of words there that are a little wishy-washy and leave a lot of gray area, and there's some kind of room there for interpretation. When it comes to these kind of things, I don't really like the words can be and should, and I'm more of a it shall, like definitively. If you do X, this is what's going to happen, and not leave it up to interpretation, because I think that's part of the reason why we get in trouble in the first place, is that they allow people to figure it, like kind of, each case on each case we'll figure it out, and I don't really like that. I don't think bishops should have this. So yeah.
But that comes from, like, both of us coming from the military side. One of the things that we have to do is read through instructions, and those instructions are very clear and they're legal, and they say you shall do this. This is your authority. And one of the things that we really emphasize in reading through these documents is that canon law has some wiggle room in order to be able to give the benefit of the doubt to individuals. And that's one of the things that was really emphasized in the letter, the accompanying letter from the Pope, is that the intent is to be punitive, but also not for it to be final. We want individuals to reconcile to the church, and to commit to becoming better. Some individuals won't, and obviously that's necessary to then, have a punitive final action. Another question that was asked that I wanted to ask at the press conference that I didn't get to ask was, we have all of these laws now on books. Who has the authority to enact them? Who is the one who's the enforcer here? Because if you have a bishop who has now had to resign because he's covered up, and that's one of the areas that are now new, that you see, is that there is an obligation by those individuals, from a priest to a bishop to a cardinal, that if you do not report abuse, that there's punitive action that's directly attached to that. So what happens if the person who's supposed to be enforcing the law actually is a lawbreaker? And we also see this in civil law, and it's not a black and white thing, Joey.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? And what I'm curious about, and where a lot of the news that's coming out now necessarily isn't about the abuse. It's about the cover-up of the abuse, of which is kind of what you're talking about there. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of the way that it's worded in some of these areas, because it still allows the bishops to do certain things, which I understand why you'd want to. But given the news that we've had over the last year or two, there's a lot of cover-up that's happening on behalf of the cardinals and bishops are covering up. And I don't think this goes far enough to addressing some of those things and putting some guide rails on how that should work. And I think that's something that still needs to be addressed, because that's obviously like the other elephant in the room. Okay, they're addressing this big part of it, but the other thing that's just sitting here that no one's really talking about is the cover-up aspect. And there's more to unpack there, but I'd like to see some of those changes sooner rather than later.
Right, and Pope Francis did come out with a motu proprio where he made it really clear, Vos Estis investigations, if there's a cover-up, a bishop is to, and a bishop is, or a cardinal is named in that cover-up, he is to resign all of his active ministry, step back in order for an investigation to take place. And there have been a few Valcestes investigations. I do know that just recently, a seminarian gave the Pope Francis a letter asking for additional Valcestes investigation to happen in a bishop in the United States because of cover-up on sex abuse in a different seminary. Individuals were taken down in the kind of the local level, kind of, administration-wise of the seminary. But the individual who was the head of it, who was the bishop, who's the one who took them down, was also covering up for this, and he has not. So this is where we start to get into the question, like we saw before with the 2002 Spotlight, right, investigation. Who was the individual who said this will never happen again, promised the press, promised the people that this, we're going to handle this? And then there was a Dallas Accord that came afterwards where the individual, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who was actually a sex abuser, is telling people that, we figured out a way of doing, of handling this, so this will never happen again. And the focus point was priests and laymen in ministerial positions having to go through briefs. And we've talked about this before, where, like, I don't know anybody who's been, who has been, incarcerated as a predator saying, you know what, if I only had a brief telling me not to be a predator, I would have stopped, my predation.
Yeah,
but because, and so
it doesn't, that
Theodore
logic there
McCarrick
doesn't
was the
quite flow correctly.
Right.
And
there
that's
was-
part of the
there was-
problem.
Yeah, and that's why Valcestes took place with Pope Francis. Now, what we were being told at the press office, that the Valcestes is going to be replaced eventually by this new canon law, and everybody's like, wait a second, so is it enough? Like, who is it doesn't seem to make it really clear that the buck stops here. But we'll just have to see, because I know canon lawyers are now just combing through this, because there were other changes, minor changes that were made to this that they're really combing through. And Joey, I wanted to just point out another thing too.
Go ahead.
In this canon law update, there were individuals who were pushing specific rhetoric because they knew that the canon law was being changed, but there was a lot of rumor mongering happening in the Vatican and elsewhere saying that this canon law was going to lift, say, sanctions on individuals who support or legislate abortion. There's something called a latae sensiae, automatic excommunication, which is right now, we know in the USCCB, there's talk about Joe Biden and his track record of legislation on abortion and his support of that, and him being able to receive communion, because you're not supposed to receive communion if you are excommunicated. And that did not change, even though there was a lot of rumor mongering that was going to take place. So I would say whenever there's something like this, where there's an official situation going on or there's official talk, to stand by and just wait until the actual document comes out, because you'll likely be surprised. This came from, again, Benedict XVI. Joey?
Yeah, I know that just in general, the press and the media and everybody wants to speculate on things that might change, but I tend to agree with you. I'd rather wait for the actual document to drop or watch the actual speech and not, we tend to sensationalize and really dig into what might happen versus what's actually happening or what did happen. And that's just a larger problem that we have in general. So that's a whole topic all by itself. So yeah, there's a lot to get in there. And I know we can continue talking about the canon law update. We might look at getting a canon lawyer on here to get some more in-depth analysis, which I think would be really interesting. It's an area of Catholicism that I think is often forgotten and not talked about very often. But when we come back, we've got briefly mentioned resignation. So we're going to talk about a cardinal that resigned when we come back after this break. And we will continue our conversation. We're going to jump more into some politics and things that happened over the last couple weeks. So we will talk to you after the break.
ever dialogued with someone who espouses relativism, which says there is no truth, or it might be true for you, but not for me? It's pretty frustrating. Deep down, we know these claims are false, but we often don't know why. Here's the reason. To say there is no truth is a contradiction. The assertion is tantamount to saying it's true that there is no truth. Plain absurdity. Now, the other position, there is no absolute truth, just truth relative to the individual set of beliefs, is problematic as well. The usage of the verb is implies an assertion about the objective order of things. It's the same thing as saying it's absolutely true that there is no absolute truth, which of course is a contradiction. No matter how the relativist slices the pie, he ends up with a contradiction, making relativism an unreasonable worldview. I'm Carlo Broussard with the ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Your Odyssey begins at the University of Dallas, the premier Catholic liberal arts university in Texas. With campuses in Irving and Italy, UD's rigorous core curriculum sets it apart. An education rooted in the great works of Catholic and Western tradition. An education that ennobles and enables students in their pursuit of wisdom, truth, and virtue. Undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs available. Start your college odyssey at the University of Dallas today. Go to udallas.edu to learn more.
And welcome back to Intersections, where we cross faith, culture, and current events. My name's Joey, and I'm joined by Bree. You're going to hear a little bit more from me today, as Bree's having a few technical difficulties. So enjoy the ride. It should be exciting. So we kind of wrapped up our first intro, our first few minutes there, talking about canon law updates and a few news items that have happened over the last couple of weeks within the Church and within the Vatican. So there's one more that we wanted to do more justice to, and that would be Cardinal Marx's resignation. So, and then we'll kind of dig into some culture and some politics after that. And but yeah, so Bree, can you give us a we both like the phrase bottom line up front, but can you give us kind of a rundown of the situation, what's happening, and what does this mean? And then we can pick it apart and see where we differ in opinion.
Yeah, we do have some differing opinions, which is not shocking because that's how we do things at Intersections. We don't like to do confirmation bias. We like to have a little bit of debate, which is one of the things that we'd love you guys to join in on. So if you are listening to us online right now and you have a comment or a question, go ahead and throw it into our comment section. But this came out 3 days ago, and it was a kind of surprise to all of us, but not surprise to, those who work in the Vatican who knew. But it looks like Cardinal Marx, who is the Archbishop of Munich, has resigned after, he said, a long Easter and Lent of discernment. And his letter to the Pope, I shared online on Twitter and Facebook, and I also put it on Instagram, as well as his follow-up letter that he released to the public as well. I find it really interesting because one of the first things that he does is that he says that there is a crisis in the church, and then he continues on to say that he believes that the church has reached a dead end. And, you know, when you think about that, like when you reach a dead end, do you either stop or you turn around and you circle back into, you know, another direction? And I think to myself, well, you know, in the current situation that we're seeing in Germany, where there is definitely a head-on collision with the Vatican with regards to many different situations, including same-sex unions, blessings, the ordination of women. It is something that I find fascinating that at this moment, the head, one of the most progressives, one of two cardinals in Germany who've been really at the head of progression in the church, has come out and said, we have hit a dead end. But the only path forward is synodality, which is what is being claimed in these particular individuals in Germany. And what I also find really interesting out of this letter is that he comes and he says, you know, I am taking responsibility as a leader for not having done my part and remaining silent when I shouldn't have on sex abuse. Now, we know that there have been other civil investigations recently in Germany on cover-up of sex abuse, and one that's ongoing, one that has just finished. And Joey, I will let you kind of go into more detail on that. But where I find this interesting is that in Germany, in the secular realm, in the press and in the authorities, they are investigating the leaders of the Catholic Church. And when I read this, the first thing that came to mind to me is it really did seem, this letter, to be one that was getting ahead of a story or an investigation. So I reached out to my contacts in Germany and I asked many different sources, have you heard anything about a potential investigation into Cardinal Marx's role in cover up or whatnot? It just seems like the connection from the canon law updates and the current letter that just came out, I don't see it as a coincidence. But Joey, you don't think so? Go ahead and give your take to this.
Well, I'd like to start off by saying I find it incredibly ironic that a progressive cardinal thinks that they hit a dead end. And I think that says more about progressivism than it does anything else. So that's pretty ironic to me, which I was not lost. I got great joy in that. So there's a lot here. And I don't, it's not that it does necessarily disagree with what you're saying. I think there probably is, there's definitely more there than what we know, just because we obviously don't know everything. Rarely do we actually know everything that's going on with a particular situation. But reading the text of his resignation made it seem like there was something else there to me. He says he wants to, well, he's willing to bear personal responsibilities, not only for the mistakes, this is a quote, for any mistakes I might have made, but for the church as an institution which have helped to shape and mold over the past decades. So I said the same thing about Archbishop Vigano. Why now? Why now? And what is his goal? Most cardinals aren't the type that take one for the team. And this seems like, I think he wants it to seem like he's falling on his sword and kind of trying to own this particular thing, but it comes off as slightly disingenuous. And the one thing that, and Bree, this is where we differed on, I was like, he can offer his resignation to the Pope. The Pope actually has to accept it. But if you're going to resign, why don't you resign from everything? Why do like a half resignation? And I get the ramifications of that choice and who can accept it, like that the Pope has to accept it and so on and so forth. But if you're going to make this big grand gesture and you're going to say that the church can't make any more progress and, I want to bear responsibility for this and show all these things, then go full force and resign and actually have some conviction. It feels like he's feigning conviction and that there's something else that's going to happen and we don't know what it is yet. So either he's going to use this to springboard himself into the limelight and he's going to start talking about all these things and he won't have to have that the weight of his ministry anymore. But he still has his Vatican positions. So I don't know that it's as cut and dry. So yeah, it's a complicated situation and there's a lot there. And what I read from it seemed a little more disingenuous than he probably intended it to do. But that's my own take on it.
And I would say, like, for those of you who may not understand the politics behind this, so the Pope has made, or the Pope Francis didn't make Cardinal Marx a cardinal, but the Pope, the chair, made Cardinal Marx a cardinal, and therefore the only person who can accept the resignation of a cardinal is the Pope, right? And the Pope has also installed Cardinal Marx in different positions in the Vatican. So the only individual who can accept that resignation of those positions is the Pope. And so when I read this, I read Cardinal Marx is resigning his position and going into retirement like any other cardinal. But you make a valid point that it's kind of gray area here. And since we haven't heard from the Vatican, we don't really know where we're at, although we know that this resignation took place a few weeks ago, that he handed this letter to the Pope. We are now just hearing about it. So it does seem to indicate, now that it is public, that the decision is coming soon. But we don't know. And this is one of the problems that we have seen in the press coming at the Holy See press office is that we often are not being given the full story or a comment from the press office, from the Holy See, with reference to specific stories that are coming out. And so I have asked, I know other individuals have asked, can we get a little bit more information instead of rumor mill pushing, because this is exactly what creates conspiracy, is when you start to see half stories coming out. But it is important to note that it was Cardinal Marx himself that put out this letter and also released his letter. So it is important to see the documents and read them as they are, and try not to do the best you can as a human being to try not read into more than that. But it is hard. To me, I read it as a very solid PR statement, potentially getting ahead of a story, because now if a story was to break, that wouldn't really be a story because he's already taken responsibility. That's how I read it, but you read it in a different way, and that's valid. It's very valid.
Yeah, like without getting too much into the tinfoil hat area, I can read his words and interpret them differently than you, but I also think the important thing is that we just don't know, and we can say that we don't know. We don't know. Right. We don't know nothing. We might never hear anything else about it ever, forever and ever, and that's okay. It's just the way that it's written and the timing of everything does seem curious. Well, and we can kind of leave it at that.
Right. And it goes back again to what we've discussed in reporting the news, and what we've discussed in journalism, is that what I can do is report what's factually there. And I can get individuals who are experts, like we were discussing, bringing on a canon lawyer. We'd love to hear from canon lawyers who are listening to this. If you are looking at the new changes in the law, for example, or what you're reading in his resignation, if you see something that we don't see, we want to hear from you. We want to see your credentials. We want to hear from you, because getting on record statements from experts, that's what we do. I'm not an expert on everything. Joey's not as well. All we can do is give our assessment on what we see in the way of facts. If asked, but that's how this radio show is for us to kind of, report on what's going on and hear some of the references and allow you all to also make your assessments based off of what we know. One of the things that we do know, Joey, just changing on to another story before we get into the big stories that we are really interested in the political sphere, is a note that happened this morning. Cardinal Zen retweeted a story that I think is ongoing. We've been discussing through most of our programs the Sino-Vatican deal, the fact that we don't really have any details on what that deal incurs in the way of responsibility for the Chinese and the Vatican, and the ongoing kind of secrecy around that. Well, we've seen today, reported out of Asia News, that the Patriotic Church in Shanghai ordained 4 deacons as priests and held back 1 deacon. And it was held back because the CCP didn't want this deacon ordained, because this deacon had attended the World Youth Day in Krakow, Poland in 2016 privately. And so I reached out to the Vatican press office this morning, Joey, and I said, I don't know what is going on here, but have you heard anything? Have you heard anything with regards to this particular ordination? Is this in accordance with the Sino-Vatican deal? And so, Joey, your takeaway as we continue on this path of reporting on China, is there anything that's giving you the warm and fuzzies that the CCP are actually abiding by a deal with the Vatican?
There is nothing that gives me warm, fuzzy feelings about the CCP or China. I think the closest thing that I get is some spicy orange chicken. That's about the only thing that would give me warm, fuzzy feelings about China. So there's so much information that comes out, whether you have an interest in U.S. politics, world politics, Vatican politics, how the deals are working out, how the faith, all of these things. We talk about China a lot, and I sometimes try to move us away from it sometimes, but it's like a black hole of just, there's so much gravity there. It just keeps being pulled back into the circle. I'm looking through news now, and something just popped up on my timeline talking about some of the statements from the Chinese state-run media and Facebook, and layering that timeline over the Fauci emails, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Yeah. And then you haven't, like, we bring up, them not allowing one of the deacons to be ordained, and so many stories revolve around it. It's a little exhausting sometimes, but yeah, it's nothing surprises me really when it comes to them anymore. I'm like, well, of course he did something as a private citizen, so can't be a priest now. And why they have any say in the first place? That'd be like the United States being like, oh, all these priests that you guys, that's great, good, okay, no, we're not doing that. I think any country, it's a unique situation to China, and I think they get treated differently by the Vatican, right or wrongly, they get treated differently, and it's pretty apparent.
Well, I know, Joey, you're really wanting to jump on the Fauci emails and the timeline, because I think a lot of people are really interested in that as well. And you make a point that you start to layer things, information that we received in January at the beginning of the real crisis in the United States, and really of last year, 2020, and really some of the disinformation coming out of China right around that time. If you were to see my timeline in December, February, and January of, December 2019, January and February 2020, you would see, and I still have some of these videos, the disinformation coming right out of China, right at the beginning when we started to hear about the virus. And then some of the reports coming out of the United States with regards to, and referring to the Wuhan laboratory, and some of the questions that were being made. Those questions, Joey, were also being asked privately in email to Dr. Fauci. Let's run through this, because I know that you have a lot of expertise in the last few weeks just going through emails and reading reports. Joey, go ahead.
So if you don't know, BuzzFeed, the fact that I'm citing them is a little ridiculous to me in the first place, but they did a good job here. So BuzzFeed filed a Freedom of Information Act, which allows private citizens, private entities, access to government communications or documents that are declassified or can be declassified. So they requested and then obtained 3,200 pages of emails that they then made available online. And then the Washington Post received an additional over 800 emails. So we're looking at about 4,000 emails or so. And they covered the time period leading up to and then through lockdowns and most of the pandemic. And there's a few big takeaways from some. There's a lot. They're still unpacking. I don't want to say unpacking, but they're still reading through them and sifting through them and looking at the timestamps and who they're from and looking at what was said publicly versus what was said via email. And that's where we really see a lot of interesting things being said. So there was a sentiment that former President Trump had really kind of pushed and bullied Dr. Fauci into doing some things which he unequivocally denies via email multiple times, actually. So that never happened. So the running theme, I guess, that President Trump didn't want him to say certain things is unequivocally false. Like, there's no truth to that statement whatsoever. The other thing that is really interesting when it comes to masking and lockdowns is his emails. So he publicly stated that he didn't think they worked, but even privately he said the same thing in emails. The other thing that's being pointed out,
he had said that publicly in press conferences and interviews at the beginning of the pandemic as well, is that he believed that masks, and you can ask any doctor who's been in surgery, that masks that are used, surgical masks that are used in a sterile environment, are used in order to protect the individual that maybe be lying on the table and open from any type of bacteria that could be spread from the doctor. And that is the same response by Dr. Fauci on this, that masks are to protect someone who may have the the infection to protect others around them. But he also said that he didn't believe that it would be necessary to wear them outside. It would defeat the point. Go ahead. I just find that very interesting because we are still seeing. Today I read a report. I wasn't able to verify this, so take it with a grain of salt. But I read a report out of New York State that today there was debate to whether or not children needed to wear masks at school, and there was a lifting of that. And now, supposedly today, being Monday, they actually have implemented it again and said in the state of New York, children are to wear masks at school.
So there's a lot of, we're going to keep hearing about this. We're probably going to talk about it at least one or two more times after this because there's new information that just keeps rolling out slowly. And it's not really covered anymore, like not covered, but the legacy media, the mainstream media doesn't really want to talk about a lot of these things.
No, because they were
not
wrong.
That we're,
and they don't want to retract and correct.
Exactly. So one of the interesting emails that came out was about the origins of COVID, which you can actually talk about now because now all the fact checkers have said that it's not a conspiracy theory anymore because it in fact looks like there's some teeth to this argument here is that it was engineered. And one of Dr. Fauci's emails even says as much, that he is fearful that it is an engineered virus. From that area, there's only one lab there that would have done it, but we can't say that that's definitively where it came from. But the other thing that's interesting, and this is where there was a lot of coverage over the last few weeks, is in his exchange with Senator Rand Paul over the funding of the lab in this area where they think it was engineered, but they can't definitively say that yet. There's connections between the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, funding the lab. In the only lab in this region in China where they are fearful that it was engineered at. So I'm saying that in very specific words and terms to make a...
That has been reported on. That was reported on in 2019, very early, before even the pandemic became a pandemic. And it was reported on by mainstream media in referring to an arrest of a Harvard professor who was seen smuggling vials of viruses out of the United States to Wuhan. This was reported by the New York Times. He was arrested. And prior to that, there were reports of arrests of individuals working at the main laboratory in Canada. And those individuals were also involved with what they believed was a conspiracy to commit spying. And so that I have referenced on Twitter as well. These are actual reports out of mainstream media that have resurfaced. And I find that interesting.
Well, there's just a lot of money. There's a lot of money that we've seen now that we can track back, and there's paper. There people are continuing, like Judicial Watch just filed a Freedom of Information Act, and they got another 280 pages of documents from the Department of Health and Human Services that revealed that in a 5-year period between 2014 and 2019, a little over $800,000 was given to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for bat coronavirus research. By the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, which Dr. Fauci is the head of. So there's money that was given, like American tax dollars funded this lab, and this is where now they're starting to allow us to, the government minders are now allowing us to start saying publicly that there's a good chance that it was lab created and it came out of this lab. Now, China has threatened, that was ridiculous. I read it the other day. So China threatened nuclear war if the Biden administration continued to press on the origins of COVID-19. And I was like, wow, nuclear war is pretty serious considering.
Yeah, you take them at their word. That's one of the things that we learn in diplomacy is that when it comes to someone making a threat in this way, you take them at the word. And our former President Trump, one of the things that people really disliked about him in Europe was the fact that he would make these sword brandishing statements. And yet, when it came to someone like the dictator of North Korea, saber rattling about how he had a nuclear button, his hand on the nuclear button, do you recall what Trump said with his response to that? Do you remember that?
Absolutely, my button's bigger. So that's, there's a lot still to come out about this. We don't know the full picture yet. There's enough to start to draw the outlines of a pretty good picture, but we don't have all the details yet. We will continue to see more and more on this. The other thing that's really interesting that came out of the emails, and we've got a few minutes before break to talk about this, but one of the things is that as you read through the emails and you start to see where some of the decisions were made or the phrasing that he chose to use was largely based on not what they always told us to do, which was follow the science. They weren't based on science. They were almost always political decisions used to reduce the political ramifications of a particular policy or a particular action that they wanted to take. So whether it's lockdowns or masks or to quarantine like the people that were on the cruise ship or people coming back on airplanes, almost every turn that you look at or every example that you look at, it was a political decision, not a science decision. Because they didn't want it to look bad, or they didn't want someone to ask too many questions about something. And that's really where the issue lies with a lot of people. It's not necessarily that mask or don't mask. It's really that they used politics to make science decisions, considering they have argued for a year now to the contrary. So that's really the big takeaway. We'll talk about this more as more information comes out, and we'll bring it back up again if there's anything seriously important. But I wanted to make sure that we got that information out to you guys. I think it's incredibly important and really fascinating to see the reverse course that they've had to do. So
and Joey,
I know we're coming up on the break, so Bree, did you want to add anything onto the back end of that before we head out?
Yeah, thanks. I do find it really interesting as well, like you said, that the use of rhetoric to push a narrative is something that we have to go back to and say again, like, unless you have, and we talk about science, unless you have fact, stand by with the narrative, stand by with the rhetoric, because sometimes it will be 100% true, but most oftentimes what we see is about 90% with potentially 10% lie. And so we have to always question, we have to ask, where's the proof? And like you said, where's the science behind all of this? And really question. We need to hold people accountable, and it seems that Fauci is about to. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some other news in the news cycle today, and maybe have some answers to your questions. So we look forward to seeing you on the other side.
Are Christians guilty of hate speech for voicing their belief that homosexual acts are immoral and contrary to human nature? Many in the culture think so. So what can we say in response? First, it's not hate speech to say a particular behavior is inappropriate human behavior given our nature as human beings. If that were true, well then any negative moral evaluation of behavior would be hate speech. But that's absurd. Second, the assertion is inconsistent with itself. Why can't Christians have a negative moral evaluation of homosexual behavior, but yet the objector can negatively judge a Christian's behavior for opposing homosexuality? Isn't he guilty of the very thing he accuses Christians of? My friends, it's not hate speech to say a particular behavior is not befitting of human beings. We must judge actions, but always with respect for the person. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Your Odyssey begins at the University of Dallas, the premier Catholic liberal arts university in Texas. With campuses in Irving and Italy, UD's rigorous core curriculum sets it apart. An education rooted in the great works of Catholic and Western tradition. An education that ennobles and enables students in their pursuit of wisdom, truth, and virtue. Undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs available. Start your college odyssey at the University of Dallas today. Go to udallas.edu to learn more.
Welcome back to Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. We've been talking over the last 45 minutes or so about a few stories. We talked about some updates out of the Vatican that have happened over the last couple of weeks, a resignation by Cardinal Marx. We've also talked about the Freedom Information Act, what it is, and how it was used by BuzzFeed to get over 4,000 emails from Dr. Anthony Fauci leading up to the U.S. response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We talked about that a little bit. There's a few other topics that we wanted to talk about this morning, and I know we've been gone for a while. We missed out on Memorial Day, and there was a lot of things that happened in relation to Memorial Day, and then yesterday was the 77th anniversary of D-Day. So I know just being veterans ourselves and having friends who have lost their fight since coming home. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about that because it's important to both of us that we remember these people and remember their sacrifices that they made. So, Bree, did you want to talk a little bit about some news over the last couple of weeks with Memorial Day and D-Day?
Right. And I know that Joey and I both get very emotional on this because, when Joey is a non-commissioned officer and myself as a commissioned officer, when we come home, we remember those who weren't able to come home. And that's Memorial Day for you. That's not Veterans Day. I mean, we do appreciate people coming to us and saying, thank you for your service. And we were proud to serve. We are proud to serve. But Memorial Day is a somber day for us. It's not a 3-day weekend. It is a long weekend, for many people. But for us, it's a very long weekend. Sometimes it takes us to a really dark place. Sometimes we have to separate from a lot of our friends and family because we're remembering our brothers. See, a lot of people maybe don't understand the fraternity, Joey, that you and I have, and with our brothers and sisters who serve. You never really experience what you experience in the military unless you've done it. And those people who did it beside you, like those experiences bond you for life. And oftentimes it's really bad experiences that we have to endure together. And so it is the deepest pain that anybody can feel especially when you come home and you find that there are brothers who haven't reached out for help, who take their lives because they're not able to cope. And we remember those brothers too. This war in particular has been the ongoing war, the very long war that we've gone through, has taken a toll. And we don't have the same type of clubs and fraternal meeting places where a lot of veterans did in the past. We don't really have that culture in our current veteran state. And so when you meet another brother, and that's a blessing with me and Joey, because we both work and have been veterans. When you meet another brother, it's like wow, it's relaxing in a way. It's like a relief that it's almost like you automatically know, you understand. But to have a leader, and we're going to be talking about this, Vice President Kamala Harris came out and said that for Memorial Day, she came out and said in a tweet, enjoy the long weekend, and automatically received such backlash on social media, and rightly so, I think. Joey, I'd love to hear your response, and I'll give my own response as a veteran. What was your take when you saw that?
There's not too many things that I can say that haven't already been said. I think that it was tone deaf. I think that it was misguided. I think that it was incredibly insulting to a lot of people, especially those that have lost loved ones. I know there's a lot that goes unsaid. A lot of people don't talk about it a lot, and I think more people are aware now of the sacrifices that have to get made, or that have been made by our service members, not just recently, but since the American Revolution. Like, there's a lot of sacrifice that happens, and there's a day, well, there should be way more than one day, but there's a day that we have chosen to honor their memory. It also means that it's a bank holiday, so we get the day off, and that's usually what people focus on is barbecues and hanging out and enjoying a nice long weekend. But that's not really what it's about. And when you're the Vice President of the United States, regardless of what you used to do or what you used to think, you're now a leader of that long tradition, and being someone that's literally a breath away from the presidency where you would be the commander-in-chief, it is imperative that you understand that sacrifice. And I think that's part of the problem, is that a lot of political leaders, especially the people that hold the Oval Office, and some leaders in Congress, they might be asked to send young men and women into harm's way, and they need to understand what that means and what that sacrifice entails. And I think it was just tone deaf. I don't think that it's about ice cream cones and hot dogs and hanging out with your family. It's really about the sacrifice that was made. And I think we're better at it today than we probably have been in the past, because so many people have been impacted by the last 20 years or so of conflict the United States has had. So with that, I would say that it's important that we remember these people. It's important that we remember their sacrifices, and that we continue to that long tradition of remembering them and why they fought and who they fought for. And I said this the other day, I was having a conversation about this, but the United States is uniquely positioned in history as one of the only nations, if not the only nation, who sent its young people to die on behalf of other countries and people in other parts of the world. It's almost an exclusive club that they would even consider doing that. Almost no other nation on the planet right now does that, and has done it so often. And that's the sacrifice. It's not just a sacrifice for the American people. It's not just a sacrifice for the U.S. Constitution or the American way of life. Oftentimes these sacrifices are made on the behalf of other people that they will never know, that they have no idea who they are, and they'll never understand the sacrifice that was made. So as Americans, it is our duty to remember them and remember that sacrifice. Whether you agree with it or not, that was a sacrifice that was made, and they paid for it with their lives, and that's what Memorial Day is about.
Right. And Joey, when I was looking through the responses, one individual I find very interesting, because I don't agree with her on a lot of things, personally speaking, but she's a veteran and she's a leader, and she ran for president for the Democrats, Tulsi Gabbard. She responded not to Vice President Kamala Harris or President Biden. She responded to the American people and said, remembering my brothers and sisters in uniform who made the ultimate sacrifice. Their courage and selflessness will never be forgotten. We honor them by taking care of our troops who serve today and making sure that the missions that they were sent on are worthy of their great sacrifice. Tulsi, like so many of us who have served, she is very much anti-war. And I think a lot of people don't understand, those of us who serve are anti-war, because we're the ones who have to go. So if we're going to go, we're going to do it well, but we would rather not be at war. And so it's a complicated situation, because people see those of us who are in the military as very strong and very focused, and we will win. And that is something that we think, because that's how we train. We get into the mindset, we go into the mission, and we accomplish the mission. But we'd rather not go. We'd rather not leave our families. And I think people have to kind of understand the complicated nature of this. Tulsi came out and said this is something that I'm hoping to do in the next few weeks for Epoch Times, is to interview individuals who have served in the military, who have said, because of what they're seeing in the way of the political nature, this detachment, as you said, this lack of real understanding what it means to serve from many of the political leaders, because they never did, other than outside within the political sphere. They never really had that sense of service that takes those of us who join the all-volunteer forces of the U.S. military. I'm going to be interviewing, I'm hoping, individuals who are planning on continuing that service in the political field, who have served, who have lost loved ones on both sides of the aisle. And I'm really hoping to also include Tulsi Gabbard in this, because I think when people start to see that you can have differing opinions, you can have civil debate, as we say here on Intersections, you can have that discourse, and it's necessary, but at the same time have that desire to serve, not be served, but to serve. Joey, any last thoughts on that? Any kind of thoughts on the whole politicalization of what we've been seeing within the military as well?
Well, I think it's important that politics stays out of the military. That's a really important thing that often goes unstated. However, it's nice to see that there is some consensus across the board, and things that we that are said that should be said that aren't said enough. And I think Tulsi's a good example of that. I don't agree with a lot of things she says, but on this particular thing, I find myself in agreement with her. And I will say that this particular holiday, the Memorial Day, is really about remembering those that didn't come home and those that made the ultimate sacrifice, and it's important that we remember that. I know that it's been a long 2 weeks. It's been, there's a lot of news that has come out. There's a lot of things that are going to continue to happen. But this is one thing that I'm glad we're ending the show on, and I think it's important that we get to say this, because it doesn't get said enough. So, I'm going to throw Bree a curveball here, but thank you for listening. Thank you for joining this week. I really appreciate the time that you guys take to listen to us and do that. So I'm not going to stop talking, and I just want us to sit here in silence for the next little bit and just remember that. And then we will talk to you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, same bat place. We will be here. And thank you.